Joe Biden brought executives from the company in to meet Barack Obama. We know that Elizabeth Warren's familiar with them because we actually have corporate records where she signed as a witness. If the Trumps did this, there would be outrage. I would be outraged.
Well, your last book really ruffled some feathers and sort of stirred the waters. This one is having the same effect, maybe because it's an election year. Tell me, when you're talking about profiles in corruption, who should we be looking at?
Well, I think you should be looking at any political figure because I believe corruption is something that anyone's capable of. But you have to really focus, I think, on political figures who want more political power. And the reason I focused in this book on progressives is they're unique, Governor. I mean, unlike moderates or conservatives or classical liberals, they're saying we need a whole lot more power to solve the problems of this country, which of course is questionable whether they would. And that makes them unique. So they need special attention because they're asking for so much more power.
You have talked about that there's not just Hunter and Joe Biden and all of the Burisma oil and gas things in the Ukraine, but there are other Bidens that are a part of the family business, if we will. Explain that.
Yeah, I call them the Biden Five. It's a little bit like the Jackson Five, but it's more corruption-oriented.
I don't think Joe's got the moves of Michael, that's for sure.
I think you're right about that. But really, it's endemic in the way the Bidens operate. You have Hunter Biden, who's done these deals in China and Ukraine and Kazakhstan. You've got his brother James. I mean, consider this. A friend of the family goes to the vice president's office in November of 2010, when Joe Biden is vice president. He set up a new construction company. 3 weeks after that meeting in the White House, he adds James Biden, Joe Biden's brother, as executive vice president of the construction company. Now, here's the problem. James doesn't have any experience in construction, in major project management, none of that. 6 months after that, this new construction company with a vice president's brother as the executive vice president lands a contract worth $1.5 billion. Billion dollars to build 100,000 homes in Iraq, funded by taxpayers, funded by the Obama-Biden administration.
So we paid for it.
Yes.
But the brother of the vice president is making some serious bank because he happens to be related to the vice president, not because he's a construction genius with a long history.
That's exactly right. And you see this with the Bidens and over again. You have a situation with his daughter is married to an individual who started a business called Startup Health that was literally launched in the Oval Office. Joe Biden brought executives from the company in to meet Barack Obama. They get special placement at this federal conference. And then over the next 5 years, Joe Biden as vice president is going and briefing the investors and partners of this company in private about healthcare policy in the Obama administration. If the Trumps did this, there would be outrage. I would be outraged. But the Bidens did it in its standard operating practice.
Well, that leads to the obvious question. I've not heard this stuff in the mainstream media. I don't think it's on CNN or ABC, NBC, MSNBC. Why not?
Great question. I think for a couple of reasons. And I've worked with CNN, I've worked with ABC, I've worked with NBC. The situation is this. There are some good reporters there, but I think the management there essentially does not want to go after certain people. It's outright political bias. But the added problem, Governor, is resources. I mean, this book took 18 months of research. There's more than 1,100 footnotes. There's no anonymous sources. It's very hard work to dig up this stuff. So it's a combination of political bias and it's a whole lot of work to get this information. The media just doesn't seem to be interested or capable of doing it anymore.
It's one of the things that I've admired most, first about Clinton Cash, which was a blockbuster bestseller. This book was #1 on Amazon before it ever hit the market.
Right.
So the pre-orders for it were phenomenal. But you do document everything. This is not a high-placed source.
Right.
Or an anonymous leaker told me.
Right.
This is time, place, date. I think it gives the book far more power, and it makes the message a little more hard to dispute. I want to move to Elizabeth Warren because, again, I'd never heard this stuff on media, but there's some issues regarding Elizabeth Warren's son-in-law. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so Elizabeth Warren has corruption issues herself. Her daughter, there's questions about some of the business work that she's done. But her son-in-law, Sushil Tyagi, he's from India, very bright guy, met Elizabeth Warren's daughter at the Wharton Business School, has a whole host of businesses based in India and elsewhere. And we know that Elizabeth Warren's familiar with them because we actually have corporate records where she signed as a witness for some of the corporate documents. He set up a company called Tricolor Films that said on its website, recently taken down, that their business model, they were going to make films funded by foreign governments. What we discovered, and it's all laid out in the book, is one of those films was actually a film financed by the government of Iran. He actually names in the film credits, he's the sole producer of this feature film. He names the government entities that fund it. These are the same government entities that are involved in all Quds days, these sort of anti-Semitic celebrations that take place in Iran. And he actually, in the film credits, the son-in-law of Elizabeth Warren, thanks the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Air Force for their in the film for their contribution. I don't know what their contribution was, but it was obviously something. And this is, of course, very troubling. If we're going to be worried about politicians having stock in, General Electric or companies, we need to be concerned about commercial ties their family has with foreign governments.
Well, Elizabeth Warren has been so critical about any corporate ties. Corporations shouldn't make money.
Yeah.
She's made a lot of money,
She
and
has.
a lot of money on corporate boards, and a lot of money speaking to big corporations. I don't hear her apologizing for that.
No, she doesn't. I mean, she played the oldest game in the book, Governor. She was hired by Congress in 1993 through 1996 to help write bankruptcy laws in the United States. And she says in legal documents that some of those were incorporated into law in 1994. Well, what did she do? She went to corporations and said, you want to hire me to help you navigate the laws that I wrote. And she got paid by major corporations, Dow Chemical, Armstrong Worldwide, $1,000 an hour. She made millions of dollars doing this. It's the oldest game of cronyism and corruption in the book. And she helped corporations navigate the bankruptcy laws that she was paid by taxpayers to help write.
I'm confident that any of these people who get into a debate with Donald Trump, should they be the nominee, will have to face some of this on the debate stage. But we're probably not going to hear it until then.
Right.
Bernie Sanders is also a person, it's been kind of interesting. He's a socialist, believes that we basically ought to give 90% of our income to the government.
Yeah.
He's done pretty well for a guy that was living off a senatorial salary.
He has. It's funny, he used to, for about 38 years, he would always say our national politics shouldn't be dominated by billionaires and millionaires. Well, about 3.5 years ago, he dropped the millionaire part because he became one.
He is one.
And part of the reason he became one is he figured out this secret, one of the dirty secrets, you know it because you know Washington well, which is if you're running a campaign, you can hire a media buyer to do your media buys, to buy television and radio ads, and that media buyer is entitled to a commission, 15% commission, and you don't have to disclose it anywhere. Well, Bernie figured this out, and you know what he did? He made his wife the media buyer. So she got the commission off of media buys for his congressional campaigns. And by the way, she had no background in media buying. She'd never done it before. That's just one of the tricks. He, over the course of 30 years, has steered taxpayer money, campaign money, and other funds, nonprofit funds, to his family members and has helped make them very wealthy.
What makes you personally most nervous looking at our government and, as you talk about in the book, profiles in corruption?
What makes me most nervous is that there are, unfortunately, people on both sides of the aisle that like that way of doing business. They don't want to address it. They don't want to deal with it. I think it's one of the reasons why Donald Trump is such a disruptive force.
Yeah.
He's called the Bidens out on this, and it makes a lot of people nervous. So my concern is there's going to be complacency about this in the Capitol. Everybody outside of the Beltway is outraged, and we need to let our elected officials know we care about this stuff.
Yeah.
This matters because it affects the type of government we're going to get.
Don't you think it bothers a lot of the Washington swamp rats that he paid his own way to get there? In other words, he was not beholden to a donor class, as most politicians have to be.
Right.
And then when he got there, he doesn't even take a salary. He's actually taken a dip in income to do it. And I'm sure that is an outrageous affront to the way it's played.
Exactly, and he's also not beholden to political consultants.
Yeah.
The political consulting class, you're familiar with it,
Yeah.
we're all familiar with
Yeah.
it, and these are individuals that are paid large sums of money to say, here is how you're supposed to talk to the American people, and here's what your policy should be. Trump threw that book out and
Yes,
said,
he
no,
did.
I'm not going to hire any of those people. I'm going to do it this way. I think it's part of his appeal.
Yeah.
And I think on the left, that's part of the appeal of Bernie Sanders. I disagree with Bernie's ideas. I think they're wrong. But I think part of the reason there's appeal to him is he's kind of doing that on the political left in the same way Trump is doing it.
There's a genuine authenticity in that. Peter, great to have you here.